The cold hit her like a wall. Cora stumbled off the last step of the iron-wheeled coach and landed knee-deep in snow before she even had time to catch herself. The door slammed shut behind her with the finality of a judge's gavel, and the vehicle lurched forward, its heavy wheels grinding through the frozen road as if she had never existed at all. She had 30 seconds to understand what had just happened. The road was empty, the forest on both sides pressed close, its dark pine trees heavy with snow, their branches drooping like tired arms. The sky above was the color of ash, low and thick with clouds that showed no intention of breaking. Wind moved through the trees in long, slow waves, and every time it reached her, it pulled the breath from her lungs. She was wearing a linen dress, worn thin at the elbows, a shawl that had seen better winters, boots with a crack along the left sole that let the cold seep in like water into a sinking ship. She had no coins. She had no map. She had no name in this part of the world, just the one she had been carrying since childhood, Cora, a name that now felt as small and fragile as she did. She turned back to look at the road the coach had come from. Nothing. Just her own footprints already beginning to fill with fresh snow. She had been traveling for 4 days. The last of her bread had gone that morning, shared with a child on the coach who had been crying too quietly for anyone else to notice. She did not regret the bread. She regretted that she had not been more careful with the single silver coin she had traded it for, the coin the driver had snatched from her fingers with a thin smile before announcing, in front of everyone, that her fare was insufficient and that she would be removed at the next stop. There had been no next stop. He had simply slowed the coach to a crawl at the edge of the northern forest and opened the door. No one inside had said a word in her defense. She exhaled slowly, watching her breath dissolve into the frozen air. Move, she told herself. You stop moving. You stop living. She did not know what lay ahead on this road. She only knew that whatever village or settlement existed in this direction was closer than turning back. There was nothing behind her worth returning to. There never had been. She walked. The snow was deep enough to make every step a small battle. Her shawl did almost nothing against the wind, and within minutes she had tucked her hands beneath her arms, hunching forward, eyes down, watching her boots sink and rise, sink and rise. The crack in the left sole let in cold that shot straight up her leg like iron. She counted her steps to keep her mind from going quiet. Quiet was dangerous. When the mind went quiet in the cold, the body followed. 1, 2, 3. She had reached somewhere near 200 when she heard the horses. Not one horse. Many. Moving fast, and from the sound of them, moving in formation, the rhythm too deliberate, too controlled to be merchants or travelers. She stopped and turned. They came around the bend in the road like something out of a story no one had bothered to tell her. 7 horses, all dark, all enormous, their breath coming in great white clouds. The riders were armored, not in the ceremonial way of noble escorts, but in the functional, battle-worn way of men who used what they wore. Dark cloaks, iron at the chest and arms. Swords at the hip, not decorative, real. Their faces were hard and alert, scanning the tree line with the ease of men accustomed to expecting threats. And at the front, slightly ahead of the others, on a horse that was somehow larger and darker than the rest. Him. Cora did not know who he was. She would learn his name soon enough. But even before she knew anything about him, her body understood something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. This man was not like the others. Not simply because of the way he rode, easy and absolute, as though the horse moved according to his thoughts rather than his hands. Not simply because of the breadth of his shoulders or the way the wind moved around him rather than against him. It was the stillness. In the middle of all that motion, the horses, the cloaks snapping, the snow churning under hooves, he was perfectly, unnervingly still. She stepped to the side of the road. The sensible thing, the safe thing, was to let them pass and keep walking. Men like that, riding like that, did not stop for women alone in the snow. But the column slowed, and then it stopped. The lead rider's eyes had found her. Even from a distance, She felt the weight of his gaze like a hand pressed flat against her chest. His horse came forward, 3 slow steps, and stopped again. He looked at her for a long moment. She could not read his expression. It was too controlled, too practiced for that. Dark eyes beneath dark brows. A jaw that looked like it had been cut rather than grown. A scar along the left side of his neck, old and faded, disappearing beneath the collar of a heavy black cloak lined with wolf fur. She lifted her chin. She had learned that lesson early. When you have nothing left to protect yourself with, at least protect your posture. Where did you come from? His voice was low and even, carrying across the snow without effort, the way a stone carries across still water. The South Road, she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. I was removed from the traveling coach. A pause. Something shifted behind his eyes, barely, almost nothing. Removed. The driver claimed my fare was short. She did not look away from him. It wasn't. He was quiet for a moment. Then, without looking back at his men, he said something in a low tone she couldn't hear. One of the riders moved his horse forward slightly, as if to object. A single look from the man at the front stopped him cold. He dismounted. That surprised her. She had expected perhaps a coin tossed from horseback. A direction pointed toward the nearest village. She had not expected him to step down into the snow and walk toward her, and she had certainly not expected what he did next. He removed his cloak. Not slowly, not ceremoniously. Simply unbuckled it at the collar with 2 practiced movements, lifted it from his own shoulders, and held it out toward her. The garment was heavy. She could see that from the way he carried it, the wolf fur lining thick and dark, the outer fabric waxed against weather. It was worth more than anything she had ever owned. She stared at it for one moment too long. Take it, he said, not unkindly, but not gently either. The way a man says something he does not intend to repeat. She reached out and took it. It was warm. Extraordinarily, almost shockingly warm, carrying the heat of his body in the lining, and when she pulled it around her shoulders, the weight of it settled over her like something solid and real in a day that had felt increasingly unreal. She looked up at him. Thank you. He studied her face with an expression she could not name. Not pity. She knew pity, had been marinated in it her whole life, and this was not it. Not calculation either, though there was clearly a mind working behind those eyes. What is your name? He asked. Cora. Where are you going, Cora? She hesitated. The honest answer was forward, the only answer she had ever had. But something in the way he asked it made the word feel insufficient. North, she said. There's a settlement, I was told, beyond the gray wood. Something crossed his face, quick, gone before she could catch it. You were told wrong, he said quietly. She stared at him. What do you mean? He looked at her for one more long moment, and then he turned back toward his horse. There is no settlement beyond the gray wood. Not anymore. The words landed in her chest like a stone dropped into cold water. She had given everything. The last weeks of her life, the last of her money, 4 days on that miserable coach, for a destination that no longer existed. He was already remounting when she found her voice. Then where? She stopped herself. She would not beg. Not in front of 7 armed strangers. He settled into the saddle and looked down at her. For one moment, just one, something in his expression softened by a degree so small she almost missed it entirely. Keep the cloak, he said. The village of Ashford is 2 miles east. Follow the tree line. He moved to turn his horse. Who are you? She asked. He paused. His men had gone very still. He looked back at her over his shoulder, and something in the way he did it, the slight tilt of his head, the weight of it, made her feel as though she had asked something much larger than she intended. Someone who knows what it is, he said, to be put off the road. And then he rode. She stood in the snow and watched them go until the sound of hooves faded into the trees. The cloak sat heavy on her shoulders, impossibly warm, smelling of pine resin and wood smoke and something darker underneath. Something she had no name for yet. Something that made the ancient part of her brain stand very quietly at attention. She turned east. She followed the tree line. And she did not know, could not have known, that the man who had just ridden away was the reason there was no longer a settlement beyond the gray wood. That his name was Tristan. That he was the Alpha King of the Northern Pax, ruler of every forest she had ever walked through, and that in the 37 years of his reign, he had never once dismounted for a stranger. Not once. Until now. Ashford was not much to look at. Cora found it exactly where he had said it would be, 2 miles east, hugging the tree line like something that had grown there by accident rather than intention. A cluster of stone buildings with low roofs weighted down by snow. A well in the center square with a bucket frozen mid-descent. Smoke rising from chimneys in thin, tired threads. The kind of place that had been surviving for so long it had forgotten what thriving felt like. She walked through the main street and drew stares the way a lit torch draws moths. Not warm stares. Cautious ones. Eyes that flickered to her face, then down to the cloak around her shoulders, then back up again with an expression she couldn't immediately interpret. Somewhere between recognition and alarm. She stopped at the first building with a sign she could read. An inn of sorts, or what passed for one in a village this size. A carved wooden board above the door read, "The Birch and Barrel." Inside, the warmth hit her like a physical thing. A fire burned in a wide stone hearth at the far wall, and the smell of it, pine wood, old smoke, something savory simmering in an iron pot, made her stomach clench with a hunger so sharp it was almost painful. The woman behind the counter was broad-shouldered and somewhere past 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back tightly, and eyes the color of riverstone. She looked at Cora the way people look at problems they've seen before but haven't solved yet. Then her gaze dropped to the cloak. Something happened in those riverstone eyes. A flicker, fast and controlled, but unmistakable. "I need a room," Cora said. "I have no coin at present. I can work for it. Cooking, cleaning, whatever you need." The woman was quiet for a moment, still looking at the cloak. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "A man on the North Road. What did he look like?" Cora paused at the interruption. "Tall, dark horse, riding with 6 others. He had a scar on his neck, left side." The silence that followed was a different quality than before. Heavier. The 2 other patrons in the room, an older man nursing something hot by the window and a young woman sweeping near the back, had both gone very still without appearing to try. The innkeeper set down the cloth she had been holding. "You can have the room at the end of the hall," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Supper's at dusk. You'll help with the morning wash in exchange." Cora nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." The woman turned back to her work. "Thank whatever luck put you on that road today." The room was small and cold, but the bed had 2 wool blankets, and the window sealed properly against the wind. Cora hung the heavy cloak on the hook by the door and sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in 4 days, allowed herself to stop. Her hands were shaking. She had not let herself notice while she was moving. Now she pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed deliberately, in and out, until the shaking eased. She was 23 years old. She had been moving since she was 16, when the family that had reluctantly taken her in after her mother's death made clear, in escalating and eventually undeniable ways, that she was not wanted. She had learned to read a room before entering it, to eat slowly so the food lasted, to sleep lightly, to never let her face show more than she intended. She had been heading north because a woman she had met briefly in a market town 3 weeks ago had told her there was work beyond the Greywood. Real work, steady pay, a household that needed hands, and didn't ask too many questions about where you came from. There is no settlement beyond the Greywood. Not anymore. She looked at the cloak on the hook. In the dim light of the small room, the wolf fur lining caught a faint gleam, dark and deep. She thought about the way he had dismounted without hesitation, the way he had taken it off his own back, as though it cost him nothing. She thought about what the innkeeper had not said, and how loudly she had not said it. "Who are you, Tristan?" She did not sleep well, but she slept. Morning came gray and sharp. Cora was in the inn's back kitchen before the innkeeper had finished stoking the main fire. Her sleeves rolled up, and her hands in a basin of water that was cold enough to ache. The innkeeper, who eventually offered the name Marit without being asked, in the short, dry way of someone making a concession, watched her work for a while before seeming to decide something. "You're not from the north," Marit said. "No." "You have no pack markings." Cora glanced up. "No." Marit was quiet for a moment. Then, "You know what he is." Cora straightened slowly. "I have guesses." "He is the Alpha King." Marit said it the way people say things that are simply true, the way they say winter is cold or fire burns. Tristan of the Northern Territories. He controls everything from the Greywood to the Stonewall Ridge. Every pack in the north answers to him. Cora absorbed this. And the settlement beyond the Greywood? Marit's expression did not change, but something tightened around her eyes. "Raided, 8 months ago. A rival faction, pushing up from the eastern borders," the Alpha King responded. A pause. There was nothing left to save. He destroyed it? He ended what was destroying it. Marit turned back to the fire. "There's a difference, though depending on where you're standing, it doesn't always feel like one." Cora looked down at the water in the basin. "Why did he give me his cloak?" "I don't know," Marit said. And Cora believed her, because there was no satisfaction in the answer, just the flat, honest admission of something that genuinely puzzled the older woman. "In 30 years of living under his rule, I have never heard of him doing anything like that, not for a stranger." She said the word stranger with a particular weight, and Cora understood the unspoken question underneath it. "Are you sure that's what you are?" She had no answer. She was sure of almost nothing. He came back on the 3rd day. She was at the well in the center square, hauling up a bucket for Marit's kitchen, when the horses came down the main road. Not 7 this time, just 3. But she recognized the lead horse immediately. That particular darkness, that particular size, and her hands tightened on the rope before she could stop them. He dismounted with the same easy economy of movement as before and handed his reins to one of the 2 riders who had accompanied him. He looked around the square in the unhurried way of a man who is accustomed to environments organizing themselves around his attention, and then his eyes found her. He walked toward her. She did not move, partly because she had nowhere particular to go, and partly because something in her, the same stubborn, chin-lifting thing that had kept her upright in the snow, refused to show him that his approach unsettled her. "You stayed," he said. "There was nowhere else to go," she said. "You made that fairly clear." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of a reaction he had decided not to fully commit to. "How is Marit treating you?" "Well enough." She looked at him steadily. "You know her. I know everyone in this territory." "That's not an answer." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she was beginning to recognize. That particular quality of assessment, of something being measured carefully behind his eyes. It should have felt uncomfortable. Somehow it didn't. "Marit's husband was a good man," he said. "He died in service to this territory 4 years ago. I owe her a debt I can't repay." A pause. "So I make sure she has what she needs, including travelers who show up asking for work." Cora stared at him. "You sent me here knowing she would take me in. I sent you here knowing it was the closest village." His voice was even, giving nothing away. "That's not a denial." This time the almost smile was a fraction more visible. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She set the bucket down on the edge of the well and crossed her arms. The morning was bitter cold, and she was wearing her shawl again. She had not touched his cloak since that first night, had left it hanging on the hook in her room like something that didn't belong to her. Which it didn't. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know me. You stopped on that road and gave me your cloak and pointed me to a safe place, and now you've come back. Why?" He was quiet for a long moment. Wind moved through the square, lifting a thin skiff of snow from the ground between them. "Because you didn't ask me to," he said finally. She waited for more. He offered nothing else. Before she could press further, one of his riders called out from the edge of the square, a short, sharp word she didn't recognize, but whose urgency needed no translation. Tristan's head turned with the focused attention of a man accustomed to reading danger in half a syllable. He looked back at her once. "Don't give the cloak back," he said. "It was never meant to be returned." He walked back to his horse and mounted in a single fluid motion, and they were gone around the bend in the road before she had finished deciding what to say. She stood in the empty square with the cold bucket of water at her feet, and the strange, unsettled feeling of a question she didn't yet know how to ask. Inside the inn, she could see Marit watching from the window. The older woman's face, when Cora finally met her eyes through the glass, held an expression that was equal parts recognition and worry. The face of someone who had just watched something begin that they knew, from long experience, would be very difficult to stop. He came back again 4 days later, and then 3 days after that. There was no pattern to it that Cora could identify, no fixed day, no fixed hour. He simply appeared, sometimes with riders, sometimes with only one, and each time he found her without seeming to look, as if he already knew where she would be. The villagers of Ashford had noticed. Of course they had. A place this small had no room for secrets. Everything that happened in the square was absorbed and redistributed through the village within hours, filtered through the particular lens of whoever was doing the telling. And what they were telling, Cora gathered from the careful silences and the sideways looks that followed her through the market, was that the Alpha King's interest in the unnamed southern woman was something unprecedented, and therefore something to be watched very closely. She tried not to think about it too hard. What she thought about instead, in the hours between his visits, was what she was building here. Small things, but real ones. Marit had given her a permanent arrangement, room and board in exchange for morning work, and 2 evenings a week helping serve the inn's patrons. It was not luxury, but it was solid ground beneath her feet, which was more than she had had in a long time. She learned the village, the blacksmith, Hendrik, a man of 40 with burn scars on both forearms and a laugh that startled birds from rooftops. The healer, an older woman named Sepha, who moved through Ashford with the quiet authority of someone who had held too many people together to waste time on ceremony. The Miller's family at the north edge of the village, 3 young children and a father raising them alone, who sometimes came to the inn for supper on cold evenings, because the house felt too large and too quiet. She learned where the road iced worst in the mornings, which window in the inn let in a draft no one had fixed, which patron wanted their ale topped without being asked, and which ones took it as an insult. She was, in other words, beginning to belong somewhere, tentatively, carefully, the way a plant that has been moved too many times sets down roots with a kind of cautious disbelief, not yet trusting the soil to hold. And then Tristan arrived on a Tuesday morning with fresh blood on his sleeve, and everything shifted. She was the one who noticed it first. He had come into the inn, something he had not done before. All previous visits had been outside, in the square or along the road. And Maret had gone very still behind the counter in that particular way she had, when things moved outside their expected shape. One of his riders, the broad one with the red beard who Cora had privately labeled the skeptic, based on the way he looked at her every time she and Tristan exchanged words, stayed outside with the horses. The other had not come at all. Tristan sat down at the table nearest the fire, as though he had done it 100 times. He looked calm. He looked, in fact, extraordinarily calm in the way that Cora had learned to recognize as effort rather than ease. She brought him ale without being asked, because it was the thing to do. And when she set it down, she saw the dark stain on the left sleeve of his riding coat. not fresh. Several hours old at least, dried to brown at the edges. A long cut, from the shape of what had soaked through. She did not comment on it. She went to the back, found Sifa's small supply of linen strips that Marit kept for emergencies, and came back. She set them on the table beside the ale. He looked at the linen, then at her. "It's fine," he said. "It's through the sleeve," she said. "It's fine," he repeated, and there was a quality to the second repetition that made clear he was not accustomed to being contradicted on the subject of his own body. She sat down across from him, which was apparently also not something people did without invitation, because something shifted in his expression with the faint quality of a man recalibrating. "Roll up the sleeve," she said, "or I'll assume the worst and send for Sefa, and she'll make considerably more noise about it than I will." A long pause. Then, with the deliberate movement of someone making a concession they have internally classified as reasonable, he pushed back the sleeve. The cut was a clean one, long and shallow, running from just below the elbow toward the wrist. It had bled well, and then clotted. It did not need stitching. It did need cleaning, and whoever had attended to it, if anyone had done a poor job. She cleaned it without speaking. He watched her work with an expression she could not read. "You're not frightened of me," he said. It was not quite a question. Should I be? Most people are. She glanced up briefly. Most people haven't had someone take their cloak off their own back in the middle of a snowstorm and hand it over. It reframes things. Something moved across his face, quiet and deep, like a shift in water beneath a surface that appeared still. "You've been asking about me," he said. She kept her eyes on the wound. "You're the Alpha King. I live in your territory. It seemed practical." "And what did you learn?" "That you're feared. That you're respected. Which around here seems to be the same thing." She tied off the linen strip with a small, neat knot. "That 8 months ago, something happened in the north that no one wants to talk about directly, but everyone references sideways." She sat back. "And that no one has an explanation for why you keep coming back to Ashford." He was quiet for a moment. "Do they need one?" "They're making up their own, which is usually worse." He looked at her steadily. "What about you? What explanation have you made up?" She folded her hands on the table. "I haven't." "Why not?" "Because," she said carefully, "I'd rather know the true one." The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, wind pressed against the shuttered windows. From somewhere in the back of the inn, Marit was making enough noise with pots to suggest she was very deliberately not listening. Tristan looked at her for a long time with that deep, measuring quality that she had stopped finding unsettling and started finding simply honest. As though being truly looked at was something she should have been afraid of, but had somehow forgotten how to be. "There is a council meeting in 4 days," he said finally. "The pack leaders of the Northern Territories gather twice a year. This season's meeting is at my keep." A pause. "I am expected to present a consolidated report on the state of the border settlements. Ashford is one of them." She waited. "I will need someone to assist with correspondence. The records from the past 8 months are incomplete." He said the next part with the careful neutrality of a man choosing his words the way a person chooses footing on ice. "You read and write." It was not a question. She had not hidden it. She wrote the inn's supply lists in the mornings, and more than once he had arrived while she was doing so. "You're offering me work," she said slowly. "I'm offering you a position at the keep. Permanent, if it suits." He lifted the ale and took a measured sip, looking at her over the rim, with eyes that were very carefully giving nothing away beyond the words themselves. "It would pay properly. You would have your own quarters." She stared at him. "Why me?" "Because you didn't ask," he said, as he had said before on the road. And again he offered nothing more, as though those 3 words were a complete and sufficient explanation that she simply hadn't learned to translate yet. She told Marit that evening. The older woman listened without interrupting, which was unusual. When Cora finished, Marit was quiet for a long time, turning a wooden spoon slowly in her hands. "You'll go," Marit said, not a question. "I haven't decided." Marit looked at her with the flat, kind directness of someone who has watched enough people lie to themselves to recognize it on sight. Cora looked at the fire. "Tell me something true about him." Marit set the spoon down. "He built this village back up after the Eastern raids 3 years ago, stone by stone practically. Sent men, sent supplies, made sure every family that had lost someone received enough to survive the winter." She paused. "He did it without announcement, without ceremony. There was no feast, no speech. People just woke up one morning and there were carts of timber and sacks of grain in the square." Cora absorbed this quietly. "He is not a gentle man," Marit continued. "I won't tell you he is. He is hard in the way that things are hard when they have survived things that should have broken them. But he is not cruel. There is a difference." She picked up the spoon again. "Go to the keep. Keep your eyes open and your head clear. And if anything feels wrong..." She met Cora's eyes. "Come back. My door does not close." Cora nodded. She went upstairs and stood for a long time looking at the cloak on the hook. Then she took it down and folded it carefully over her arm and began to pack the small bundle of things that constituted everything she owned. The red-bearded rider, she learned his name was Devon, did not attempt to hide his feelings about her presence when Tristan's small party set out the following morning. He rode behind her with the energy of a man solving a problem he has not yet been permitted to voice aloud, and every time she glanced back, his eyes were already on her with the particular brand of suspicion that was less about her personally and more about the shape of the situation. She understood it. She was a stranger with no pack, no history in this territory, no name anyone could verify. And his king had brought her into the keep. She would have been suspicious, too. What she could not have anticipated, what none of them could have anticipated, was that they were being watched from the tree line as they rode. A figure, cloaked in gray, standing perfectly still between 2 pines at the edge of the gray wood. Watching the small party move north along the road. Watching, specifically, the woman wrapped in the Alpha King's cloak. And then the figure stepped back into the trees and was gone, as silently as snow falling. The keep was not what she had expected. She had built it in her imagination on the ride north. Something severe and cold, all sharp stone and iron gates. The kind of place that announced its owner's power through deliberate intimidation. What she found instead was something older and stranger. The walls were dark granite, yes, and the towers rose high enough to vanish into the low winter sky. But there was something almost organic about the structure, the way it had been built into the hillside rather than imposed upon it, the way the trees came right up to the outer wall, as though they had been invited rather than cleared away. Inside the main gates, the courtyard was alive with movement. Stable hands, riders, 2 women carrying baskets of dried herbs toward a side door, a man repairing something leather near the forge. It smelled of horses and wood smoke, and the deep, particular cold of stone that has been standing for centuries. No one stopped what they were doing when Tristan rode in, but everyone was aware of him. She could feel it, the way a room full of people is aware of a fire without turning to look at it. A woman came out of the main entrance as they dismounted. 40, perhaps, lean and precise in her movements, dark hair cut short and practical, wearing a wool tunic and leather breeches that suggested function over anything else. She had the eyes of someone who categorized everything she looked at, and she categorized Cora in about 4 seconds flat. "This is Rena," Tristan said. "She manages the keep." "And has been doing so," Rena said pleasantly, "without additional administrative assistance for 6 years, so I'll reserve judgment on the necessity of the arrangement." She looked at Cora with something that was not quite hostility and not quite welcome, more like a door held at a precise angle, neither open nor closed. "You can read and write." "Yes," Cora said. "Figures and accounts? Well enough. Languages? 2, 3, if you count market trade shorthand." Rena's expression shifted by one small, almost imperceptible degree. "Come with me," she said. "I'll show you the records room." The records room was a disaster. 8 months of incomplete ledgers, supply tallies from 4 different settlements written in 3 different hands, correspondence that had been filed by someone who appeared to have used a system intelligible only to themselves, border reports stacked without dates, a full winter's worth of pack council correspondence bundled together with twine and shoved behind a wooden crate, as though whoever had put it there had hoped it would simply resolve itself. Cora stood in the middle of it for a long moment. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She was still working 3 hours later when Rena came back with a tray. Bread, hard cheese, something hot in a clay cup. She set it on the corner of the table without comment, and looked at the organized rows Cora had begun laying out across the floor. "You sorted by settlement first, then date," Rena said. It seemed the logical sequence for the council presentation. A pause. "That is how I would have done it." It was not an effusive compliment. But from Rena, Cora was beginning to understand. It was the equivalent of 1. "The Eastern Border reports," Cora said, not looking up. "There are 3 months missing, March through May." Rena was quiet for a moment. "Those months are complicated." Cora looked up then. "Because of what happened at the settlement beyond the Greywood?" The pause that followed had a particular texture. Careful, weighted. "His name was Edric," Rena said finally, "the way people say the names of the dead, with the specific restraint of someone who has practiced not letting the name do more damage than necessary. The leader of the faction that moved on the northern settlements. He had been positioning for 2 years, building alliances with packs that had grievances against the Alpha King, promising territory, promising autonomy. She looked at the records on the floor. What he actually delivered was violence. And Tristan stopped him. Tristan ended him. The distinction again, the same one Marit had drawn. The settlement beyond the Greywood was already burning when he arrived. He pulled out who could be pulled out. Then he made sure Edric could not do it again. Cora thought about the scar on Tristan's neck, the way he had said someone who knows what it is to be put off the road, the weight behind it. Was Edric the one who... She started. "Yes," Rena said before she could finish. "He was." She did not see Tristan until the evening of the 2nd day. The keep had its own rhythms, and she was learning them, meals at specific hours, the flow of people through certain corridors at certain times, the particular hush that fell over the main hall in the late evening when the day's work wound down and the fires burned low. She had found a pattern for herself within it, careful and unobtrusive, the habit of years. He found her in the corridor outside the records room, carrying a stack of newly sorted ledgers toward the main hall. "You haven't stopped," he said. "The council meeting is in 2 days. You've been working since before dawn." She glanced at him. He was looking at the stack in her arms with an expression that she had learned to read now as something he did not intend to fully show. A kind of quiet attention that was not quite concern, but was adjacent to it. "I'm fine," she said. The echo of his own words from the inn, when she had cleaned his arm. She saw him register it. "Come with me," he said. She followed him. He took her not to the main hall but to a smaller room she hadn't been in yet, a study of some kind, with a fire already burning and a wide window that looked out over the northern forest. The trees were black against the evening sky, and the first stars were appearing between the clouds. It was very quiet. He poured 2 cups of something from a clay jug on the side table and handed her one. She sat in the chair nearest the fire because her feet ached, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Tell me something about where you came from," he said. She looked into her cup. "Why?" "Because you know a great deal about this territory, and I know almost nothing about you." She considered this. It was fair. More than fair, actually. She had been cataloging information about him since the road, and had offered very little in return. "My mother died when I was 12, she said. She was a seamstress. She was good at it. She could look at a piece of cloth and understand its grain before she cut it. She said every fabric has a direction it wants to go, and your job is to find it, not fight it. She paused. She was right about most things. He was listening with the quality of absolute attention that she had only encountered in very few people, the kind that makes you feel that what you're saying matters, not because they need it, but because they have chosen to give you that. After she died, I was placed with a family in the South. They were not unkind, precisely. But I was not theirs, and they never let me forget it. She said it without bitterness, simply as fact. When I was 16, I left. I've been moving since. Toward what? She looked up at him. I used to know the answer to that. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind moved through the tops of the pines. The woman who told you about the settlement beyond the gray wood, he said slowly. What did she look like? Cora frowned. Why? Describe her. Middle-aged, gray cloak. She was in the market at Veldon. I was only there for one afternoon. She approached me, told me there was good work to be found north of the Greywood, gave me the name of the settlement. Cora paused, the memory sharpening with sudden clarity. I thought it was chance. She seemed to know I was looking. Tristan set his cup down carefully. His expression had gone very still, not the controlled stillness of a man choosing his reactions, but the different, more dangerous stillness of a man whose mind had just landed on something solid and alarming. The settlement she named, he said. Was it Vielle? The word landed with strange weight. Yes. Vielle has been gone for 8 months. His voice was even, but there was something working underneath it. There is no one left there to report that it exists. Anyone who knew that name and was sending travelers north to find it. He stopped. Was lying, Cora said quietly. Or worse. He looked at her, and for the first time since the road, the careful management in his face slipped fully enough for her to see what was underneath. Not fear. She did not think fear was something this man allowed himself, but something close to it. Something that looked like the recognition of a threat he had not fully mapped yet. I need you to stay inside the keep walls tomorrow, he said. Why? Because that woman in the market did not find you by accident. He stood, and the shift in him was immediate and complete. From the man who had sat across from her with a cup of something warm to the Alpha King, the decision-maker, the one who moved in response to threats. And I don't know yet who sent her. She barely slept. She lay in the dark of her small but solid room and listened to the keep settle around her. The sound of the wind outside, the occasional footstep in a corridor, the distant sound of someone on watch on the outer wall, and thought about the woman in the gray cloak. She had not thought about her since that market afternoon in Veldon. Had filed her away as luck, as chance, as the arbitrary kindness of a stranger pointing her north. Now she pulled the memory back and examined it with new eyes. The way the woman had positioned herself near the stall where Cora had stopped longest. The way she had known Cora was looking for work, for direction, for somewhere to go. The particular detail of the settlement's name, not just north of the Greywood, but Vielle, specifically. A dead name. A name that would send a woman with no pack, no connections, no one to miss her, straight into the Northern Territories. Straight into Tristan's territory. Someone sent her. The question was not why someone wanted Cora in the Northern Territories. The question, the colder, more frightening one, was whether getting Cora here had anything to do with Tristan at all, or whether she was simply the method, the distraction. The stone dropped into still water to see what rose to the surface. She was still turning it over in her mind when she heard it. A sound from outside her window. Not wind. Not a branch. Deliberate. The particular quality of movement that a person makes when they are trying very hard not to make any. She lay completely still. The sound came again. Below her window, at ground level, near the outer wall. And then, just at the edge of hearing, a voice. Low, urgent, unmistakably human. Not speaking to her, speaking to someone else. She got up silently, moved to the window, and pressed herself against the wall beside it. Through the narrow gap in the shutter, she could see the courtyard below, mostly shadow. The torches burned low. 2 figures, cloaked in gray, standing near the base of the wall, heads close together. She could not hear the words, but she could see one of the figures clearly enough in the torchlight to recognize the silhouette, the particular set of the shoulders, the way the head tilted slightly to the left when listening. It was Devon, Tristan's most trusted rider, the man who had watched her with suspicion since the moment they met. He was in the courtyard in the middle of the night, speaking in secret with a figure in a gray cloak. Cora pressed her back against the cold stone wall and understood, with sudden and absolute clarity, that the danger she was standing in was far larger than she had imagined, and that she had, at some point in the last few days, moved directly into its center. She did not go back to sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed until the first gray light of morning began to press through the shutter cracks, turning the problem over and over in her mind, the way her mother used to turn cloth before cutting, looking for the grain, looking for the direction it wanted to go. Devon had been with Tristan for years. Everyone in the keep spoke of him as an extension of the Alpha King's will, the right hand, the one who rode closest and spoke most directly. His suspicion of Cora had seemed from the beginning like the natural protectiveness of a man guarding something he valued. She had even respected it. But protectiveness and betrayal could wear the same face. She knew that better than most. The question was what to do with what she had seen. Going to Tristan directly meant accusing his most trusted man on the evidence of a shadowed courtyard and a gray cloak. He might believe her. He might not. And if Devon learned she had spoken before anything could be confirmed, whatever was being planned would simply move faster. She thought about the woman in the market in Velden, the gray cloak. The cloaked figure in the courtyard had worn the same color. It might have meant nothing. People wore gray cloaks across every territory in the north. Or it meant exactly what it looked like. By the time the keep stirred to life around her, she had made a decision. She would find the evidence first. The records room gave her cover. No one questioned her presence there. She had established herself as someone who spent long hours buried in documents, and Rena had, over the past 2 days, shifted from door held at an angle to something approaching genuine collegial respect. This meant Cora could move through certain parts of the keep without drawing attention. She started with what she knew. Edric, the faction leader Tristan had ended 8 months ago, had built his network through alliances with disaffected packs. Rena had said he'd been positioning for 2 years. That kind of network didn't disappear when the man at its center died. It scattered. It went quiet. It waited. She pulled the eastern border reports that did exist, the ones from before and after the 3 missing months, and read them with new attention. Not for what they reported, but for what they didn't. The gaps. The careful absences. Settlements that appeared in one report and were not mentioned in the next. Names that surfaced once and vanished. One name appeared twice, in 2 different reports, 3 months apart, in connection with supply movements along the Eastern Road. Not a pack name, a personal name. Soren. She found it a 3rd time, in a piece of correspondence that had been misfiled, tucked inside a supply tally where it had no business being, as though it had been placed there by someone who wanted it lost but couldn't bring themselves to destroy it entirely. It was a letter. Short, written in a compressed, deliberate hand. The northern woman will arrive before the snow breaks. When she does, the king will be distracted. 3 days is enough. Do not fail this time. It was not signed. But at the bottom, pressed into the wax seal that had already been broken, was a mark she recognized, a small precise symbol she had seen before, this very morning, trying to remember where, and then remembering with a cold clarity that arrived like a hand closing around her throat. It was the same mark that was stamped into the leather of Devon's riding saddlebag. She had noticed it on the first day, had assumed it was a pack insignia, had filed it away without weight. She was already moving. She found Tristan in the main hall reviewing the council documents she had prepared, standing at the long table with two of his pack representatives who had arrived that morning ahead of the meeting. She walked in without hesitating, because hesitating would cost time she didn't have. "I need to speak with you," she said. "Now. Privately." One of the representatives looked up with the expression of a man accustomed to being the most important person in most rooms. Tristan looked at her face and said, without inflection, "Leave us." They left. She put the letter on the table in front of him. She watched him read it once, quickly, and then again more slowly. She watched something happen in his expression that was not quite what she expected. Not shock, exactly. More like the particular look of a man who has suspected something for a long time and has just been handed the shape of it. "Soren," he said. "You know the name." "Edric's second. I thought he had gone to ground after the Eastern raids. We searched for him." His jaw tightened. "Not well enough, apparently." "The mark on the seal," she said. "It's on Devon's saddlebag." The silence that followed was the most dangerous kind, the kind that precedes something irreversible. "Show me," he said. They found Devon in the stables. He was saddling his horse. At that hour, with the council meeting beginning in less than half a day, there was only one reason a man saddles his horse. He is planning to be somewhere else. He heard them come in. He turned, and in the moment before his expression settled into something controlled, she saw it. The flicker of a man whose calculation has just failed him. "Devon," Tristan said. His voice was very quiet. "My lord." Devon's eyes moved to Cora, and the look in them was not hatred. It was something worse. Assessment. The look of a man who has made an error and is already working out how to contain it. "How long?" Tristan asked. A pause. Then Devon exhaled, and with the exhale went whatever performance he had been constructing. What remained was something older and more tired. "Since before the Greywood. Soren came to me before the raids. He told me Edric had information about your father's death. The truth of it. Information that had been buried." His voice was flat, but something ached underneath it. "I wanted to know. You have to understand. I wanted to know." The air in the stable was very still. "My father," Tristan said. "Soren told me it wasn't enemies from the south. He said it was covered up by the council. He said if I helped him position Soren's people near the keep, he would give me proof." Devon's hands dropped from the horse's flank. "I never agreed to harm you. I never agreed to harm anyone. I only agreed to create a situation where Soren could make his case to the council directly. The woman," his eyes moved to Cora again, "was meant to be a distraction, something to occupy your attention. That's all I was told." "That's all you were told," Tristan repeated, very quietly. "I know what I did." Devon met his eyes, and in that moment there was something genuine there. Not the performance of remorse, but the real thing, which is uglier and less articulate. "I know." Tristan said nothing for a long moment. He stood with the stillness that Cora had first noticed on the road. The absolute, controlled quiet of a man who contains very large things in a very disciplined interior. "The information Soren offered you," Tristan said finally, "about my father." Devon waited. "He lied to you." Tristan's voice did not change. "My father's death has been investigated 3 times by 3 separate councils. I have read every document. There is no buried truth. Soren used what you needed to hear to get what he needed from you." A pause. "He has been doing that his entire life." Something broke in Devon's face. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way old wood gives way, without a sound almost. Soren was found before nightfall. He had been positioned in the forest east of the keep with 4 others, waiting for the window that Devon's distraction was meant to create. Tristan's riders brought him in before the council meeting began. Cora was not present for what happened next. She did not need to be. The council meeting proceeded. She sat at the back of the hall and watched 12 pack leaders from across the Northern Territories hear the reports she had spent 3 days organizing. Heard them discuss the eastern border with the measured, practical language of people who have been governing difficult terrain for a long time. Heard Tristan speak, not at length, not with performance, but with the particular directness of a man who respects the people he is addressing enough to tell them the truth plainly. She watched him and thought about what Devon had said. A distraction. She had been sent north as a tool. A gray-cloaked woman in a market, a name that led nowhere. A woman with no ties and no history dropped into the Alpha King's path to occupy his attention, while Soren moved into position. Except that it hadn't worked. Not because the plan was poor, but because something had happened on a snowy road that no one had planned for. Not Soren, not Devon, not even Tristan himself. Something that didn't follow the logic of strategy or manipulation or political positioning. She wasn't sure she had a name for it yet. After the council members had gone to their quarters for the evening, Tristan found her in the records room. She was filing the last of the documents, returning everything to order, the room now organized and legible in a way it had not been in months. He stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking. "You should have told me what you saw in the courtyard immediately," he said. "I know," she said. "I wanted to be sure. It put you at risk." "I was already at risk. I just didn't know the shape of it yet." She set the last ledger in its place and turned to look at him. "Are you angry?" He considered the question with a seriousness she appreciated. "No," he said. "I am—" He paused. "Unused to someone solving a problem I didn't know I had." She almost smiled. "You're welcome." He came into the room properly then, and leaned against the table in a way that was almost, not quite, relaxed. She had noticed that about him. That ease was something he approached rather than inhabited, as though it was a territory he was learning to trust. "Devon," she said quietly. Tristan looked at the floor briefly. "He will be held through the winter, then exiled from the territory." His voice was measured. "He is not innocent, but he was used by someone who understood exactly which wound to press." He looked up. "That does not excuse it. It only explains it." She nodded. "I owe you a significant debt," he said. "You gave me your cloak in a snowstorm," she said. "I think we can call it settled." Something happened in his face then, real and unguarded and warm, a thing she had not seen from him before in full, though she had seen its edges. Not quite a smile, more than one. The expression of a man allowing himself, carefully and deliberately, to be known. "Stay," he said. The word was simple and direct, and held none of the careful distance he had been maintaining since the road. Not for the records, not for correspondence. He looked at her steadily. "Stay because you have built something here in a very short time, and because Ashford is not the only place in this territory where a door does not close." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her mother's hands on cloth, finding the grain, following the direction the fabric wanted to go, rather than fighting it. "All right," she said. Epilogo. Spring came late to the Northern Territories, as it always did, reluctantly in increments, the snow retreating by inches before the pale sun. But it came. Marit visited the keep in the 3rd month of the new year, ostensibly to deliver a supply concern to the Alpha King's administration, and transparently to see for herself how Cora was faring. She found her in the courtyard on a clear morning, going over the spring border reports with Renna, the two of them arguing companionably about filing methodology in the way of people who have found, to their mutual surprise, that they think alike. Maret watched for a moment from the gate. Then she nodded to herself, once, with the satisfaction of someone whose read on a situation has been confirmed, and went inside for tea. Soren was tried before the full council in early spring. The evidence was clear. The verdict was unanimous. He was stripped of pack standing and exiled beyond the Northern Territories, with the border sealed against his return. He went without drama, a small, bitter man whose plans had been larger than his understanding of the people he had tried to manipulate. Devon's exile was quieter. He left on a gray morning with a horse and a pack, and what remained of a loyalty that had been turned against itself by someone who knew exactly how to find the cracks in a person and widen them. Tristan stood at the keep gate and watched him go. He did not speak, but he watched until the road took Devon out of sight, and the watching itself was a kind of farewell. He was not a sentimental man, but he was a thorough one. Hendrik the blacksmith in Ashford repaired the crack in Cora's left boot sole on one of her visits back to the village, without being asked and without charge, pressing the sealed leather back into her hands with the gruff practicality of a man who shows care through function. She wore those boots for another 2 years before they finally gave out entirely. And by then, she had stopped counting the miles she'd covered in them, because she had, at last, stopped needing to. The wolf fur cloak hung in her room at the keep, on the same kind of hook she had hung it on in Ashford. She didn't wear it often. She didn't need to. It had done what it was meant to do, not just on the road in the snow, but in everything that followed. It had been the first visible proof that the world could surprise her in the direction of kindness, and some things you don't need to keep using in order to keep needing. Tristan never fully explained why he had stopped on the road that day. She asked him once, in a quiet evening in the study that had become a shared space, the fire burning low and the northern forest dark beyond the window. He was quiet for a long time. "You lifted your chin," he said finally. She waited. "You were standing in the snow with no coat, no coin, no destination, and someone had just put you off the road in the middle of winter. And you lifted your chin." He looked at her with the eyes of a man who has spent a very long time in a world that rewards the appearance of strength, and has learned to recognize what the real thing looks like. "I have been a king for a long time. I know the difference between someone performing courage and someone who simply has it." She thought about that for a while. "You know," she said, "for a man who doesn't explain himself, you're remarkably clear when you decide to." This time he did smile. Fully, without reservation, the expression arriving on his face like something that had been waiting a long time for permission. The fire crackled. Outside, the northern wind moved through the pines, and in the stone corridors of the keep, in the village of Ashford 2 miles east, in every settlement along the borders that were slowly, steadily becoming safer, life continued in the ordinary, irreplaceable way that life does when the people responsible for it are paying attention. It was not a perfect world. It was not without hardship or loss, or the long memory of things that had burned. But Cora had stopped moving, and that, after everything, was enough.